In this lesson, we're going to look at the first vocalization part for task 1A. It's a fairly easy part in terms of notation. I haven't played this one in because there's a bit of automation that I wanted to do. The automation that I've done to kind of fluctuate the frequencies to kind of increase the accent could also be done using the pitch bend wheel. If you're going to play it in, that could be quite an easy way of doing it also. I've taken the route of just doing a frequency automation, so that's the route I've taken, but there are other ways in which you can achieve this sound. So this isn't the only way, this is just the one I've chosen for now, and I may come back and I may have a look at it. Okay, so all the notes for this part are on C3 or above, which is middle C or above, which is read from the treble clef. Remembering again about your sharps, so F sharp, C sharp, and there are no G sharps actually, so you don't need to worry about G sharp. But any C that you find is a C sharp, and any F that you find is an F sharp. As you can see from in front of you, this starts halfway through this intro section and kind of has this little repeating delay section in the verse. This delay section isn't written. This is something that I've just heard and I wanted to kind of put that in there. I didn't necessarily need to put the notes in. I could have just done I could have just used a delay to get that effect. Now the bridge is slightly different in that the very last two notes aren't written in the score. It was just something I also heard. And then we've got a complete repeat of the bridge up here with just a couple of different notes at the end. So how I've seen this is if you are going to use the note input or the piano roll to get your notes in, you are going to have to work out where the accents are. Now this la 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 bit has some accents right at this beginning, and they're kind of thrown over, and that's how the rhythm works. So when we're looking at the marks for rhythm, it's going to be really important that you've worked out these accents, okay? And you can see them where I've just kind of used the velocity tool to make them ever so slightly louder. And that's part of the repeat there. Another thing you're going to want to do is try and find places in which the notes are actually shorter than written. All the notes on the score are written as quavers, but as you can see here, we've got some staccato patterns. You'll notice that I've done some overlapping. That's because I wanted to use the portamento tool as well to kind of accent that glide, because there's this kind of this sampled section where it kind of is an abrupt lead into the next note. Let me just play that for you, because you're going to have to try and find a way of making that, and I'll show you how I've dealt with it, but there are obviously 100 different ways that you could have dealt with this. So here's the actual song. And it's where it goes na na rather than la la. Tends to be where that accent's happening. So the first thing that I've done is use the portamento tool just by creating a little bit of an overlap. So the portamento tool will help it slide to that note rather than going from pitch to pitch. The next thing that I've done is I've used the velocity tool just to make those notes louder. So I've just selected those notes and just pushed them up to make them louder. I've made this second one staccato, and you've got to really hear the phrasing of this piece, and it's going to be really important that you shape the phrasing. So the first thing I've done is just made these notes staccato, so you go na na rather than na na. These parts here roll into one another, so all I've done is I've used some overlapping. As I hover over it, you can see that the notes are actually overlapped. There's a few other ways that I could have done this. Make sure you don't overlap these two notes though, because that will chuck the phrasing out ever so slightly. You're going to have to spend a lot of time just shaping these notes. If you play it in and use the pitch bend wheel, that's not going to be as big a issue, because you can nail that in real time. But as I've typed them in, that has become an issue. I will also have to look further at these velocities to make them more accurate. So let's look at the instrument that I've used, and it's quite a nice instrument. I'm a bit self-conscious about anything to do with vocals where I have to do them as a MIDI part or a virtual instrument part, because it's very, very difficult to get them sounding exactly the same as the actual vocals, obviously. So I'm very self-conscious about this, and I think you will be as well when you're leading this. How am I going to make this out of a MIDI part? And it is very difficult. I guess the best way of approaching this is just making sure it's stylistically appropriate, okay? Just try and focus in on an instrument that doesn't sound too out of place. Hence I've gone for more of a synthesized sound. Now where I've found this initial sound, and I have had to change this quite a bit, but where I found this initial sound is under synthesizers, then I've gone for a lead synth, and then I've used this one. Another one that I really liked, I think, was this analog funk. But in the end, I chose this one, and I've jiggled around with it. So here's my current sound in its state that I've got. Okay, and if we compare and contrast that with the actual track, see what you think. Okay, so it's not too bad a fit, and it works for the specification. There's a few things I would have done differently had I been allowed to use audio, but this is our best fit for now. So that's the instrument I've used. Now let's come into the instrument, and I'll show you some of the ways I've manipulated. And I will give you the screenshot of this in the lesson, so make sure you go to the lesson, just have a look at the screenshot. Now the portamento tool on this particular instrument is right here. It's called Glide, and I've made the bend short, so it's nice and fast, and I've made it span over 3 semitones. You can play around with this until you get the right kind of glide from note to note, but it is a very subtle thing, and it just makes it jerk to the next note and slide to the next note rather than an instant note to note transformation. You might want to set up an experiment. If you never played with portamento before, you might want to set up an experiment just to kind of have a little play with that. The other thing that I've done to this is I've changed the attack times, also to help it kind of glide into the next note, so the attack time kind of has changed ever so slightly. And I've used the lowest possible denominator to the highest possible denominator with this attack time, and here also. I've also pulled down the cutoff point and the resonance point as well, just to make it less of a sharp sound, because although the sound, when it goes to those na-na, it goes quite high, I've actually used a frequency automation to get that. But I didn't want the rest of it sound like that, because the la 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 is actually quite a dull sound. So it's just making sure that I didn't have that. And actually, I probably could have automated this to get the actual tonal change as well. So, and yet another way. So you could have used the way that I'm going to show you in a second. You could have automated the cutoff and resonance to get that sound, or you could just do a simple, if you're playing it in live, just a kind of pitch bend on the keyboard. Okay, so that's the instrument, and I'll give you that screenshot as well. I've also used a delay sound for this, so there is a bit of delay. This comes pre-built with it, but I have changed this ever so slightly. The reason I've used delay in this particular stereo one is because on my panning, I've got it going down the center, but I couldn't make up my mind if it was bouncing ever so slightly from left to right, and it is very subtle. So to get that kind of full spread sound that you're hearing, I've actually used the stereo delay, and I've just pulled up the feedback ever so slightly for both the left speaker and the right speaker, and then I've balanced them in the middle, and it's tiny, it's absolutely tiny. Once again, I'll give you the screenshot for this as well. I've pulled it down in the mix. As you're probably noticing at the moment, my mix compared to the original is ever so slightly quieter. The reason I've done this is because obviously the actual track that I'm using would have been mastered. So I'm leaving myself enough headroom that later on I can actually master this and bring it back up to the volume. So I'm trying to find relative volumes within my own mix at the moment. And you're going to have to try and work that out for yourself as well. But for the moment, the best rule of thumb is to bring things down rather than up. We are looking in our master meter or our output meter, we are looking for a little bit of headroom. As you can see at the moment, I've got 0.5, which means I have no headroom at all. So I'm still going to have to bring it down ever so slightly further across all channels. Okay, the final thing that we need to look at is what I've done with the automation. So if I come into here, and I press the A button to get my automation up. Now I've used 2 channels. Let me minimize this a little bit, and we'll zip this down. And I've used 2 channels. I've used the peak, and I've also used the frequency. Let me zoom into this area so you can see what's going on. And then I'll leave the piano roll up as well, so you can see the actual point where I've manipulated the frequencies. Let's bring up the actual thing. So obviously during the kind of subtle stages of the actual loop, I didn't want the EQ on at all, so I've turned it off. And how I've turned it off is in this first channel here. I've just brought it down from 0 dB, taken it up to 9 and then back down. So all the time I don't need it, it's off. And you can see the notes where this playhead's at is where I've used these accents, okay? So if you whiz through and go to the next notes that are in this orangey colour, you can see that's the next point at which I've done this. And then so on to the next bit. And once again, there's different ways that you could have achieved this frequency fluctuation, but this is the way I've chosen. And the reason I've used this as an automation is once I've done it once, I was able just to copy the automation onto the next track, and it was there for me, and it did speed up the process ever so slightly. So let's look at this. Let's mute this track and put mine on. You should be able to see it here, and you should be able to see it here. If you're not familiar with automation, I did have to turn the touch on first because I recorded this in live and then I tweaked it. So I had to turn the touch on first to get the automation to read up here straight away without having to kind of delve through and find these automations. Once you've gone through touch, make sure you change it to read, otherwise you will overwrite all of your settings. So here it is. And you can see it's very, very subtle, ridiculously subtle in fact, but that's what it required. And if we listen to the track, you can just hear that ever so slight fluctuation of frequency, and it's probably slightly more abrupt than that, but that's how I've done it for now. And once again, I probably will come in, I will probably tweak this even further, but this is just a really good starting point for you guys. And you can hear that really screech off at the end. So you might want to have a play around. The direction I've taken it in at the moment is from high to low. Once again, that might not suit. You might want to go from low to high, or you might want to choose a different set of frequencies. You will have to play with that. You will have to kind of work out for yourself which one. But just remember, make sure you turn it off. You do not need that frequency adjustment for these other notes. You only need it for those two accent notes as they happen. Another thing, a bit of a tip that I want to tell you guys about, because it happened to me and I ended up deleting a load of my work or changing a load of my work and going, oh god, if this happens to the students, they're going to be stuffed. What I was doing, I was actually down here with my where is it, my SFX, because I noticed that it was ever so slightly different. So I've been tweaking away at my SFX track today as well. So I was tweaking down there and I went back up to the top and I forgot to click on this. So I brought up the instrument and I started playing around with all the glides and all that, and then went, oh no, I've just tweaked the wrong instrument. So I had to kind of go back and redo it. So it's really important, if you are going from one track to another and you've got the perfect sound on an instrument, two things. One, do lots of save ases. So come up here and do lots of save ases. And secondly, just make sure you select the track first so you get the right parameters over here. Seems a silly thing, but I've made that mistake today. So yeah, that is common. Okay, so that's the sound, and I'll give you all the screenshots for that so you can have a little play around with what I've got so far. Once again, it is a work in progress, so you will have to do a lot of your own manipulation. Now, this bit here, I've heard this has got a delay on it. This is what I'm hearing. Let me just show you this delay. It's not on the score, and it's basically the first two notes of this bar here. But let's listen to the track so you can hear that delayed out section. Don't speak. Okay, so hopefully you heard that, and here's what I've got so far with that. And because it's a delay section, you'll notice that the velocity that I've used is just gradually getting quieter. So the first one's quite loud, as if it was an actual delay, and then it goes quieter, quieter, quieter. Okay, so you will need to be aware of that. The other note change that I've found is in this last bar, these two notes are not written on the score. And once again, I've just literally seen that it's this phrase here, and I've just copied them over. You will need to be very aware of that. That's not written in. And I think there was one more right at the end that wasn't written in. I think it was this one that might have been slightly different. No, it doesn't look like I've changed it actually. Remembering you will need a fade for these last 4 bars as well, according to the specification of task 1A. I haven't put my fade in yet, but it's literally as easy as pressing the A button. Sorry, let's go back to that bit. I tend not to do my fade straight away. I'll probably do all my fades in the mastering when I actually master it, but it's up to you. A lot of people don't worry about mastering, don't bother doing mastering, and they just do all their fades in the actual mixer. But I'll probably do all my fades, or the majority of my fades, when I come to mastering it. But all you'd come down here is change this over to the volume, and then you just type in this one. So put a little dot there, or a little dot here, and then you just literally just drag it down to suit. And I'd probably leave it about there. So if you want to draw in a nice automation, that's what you can do. Okay, so that's it for me today. Have a little go with it, have a little play around with it. If you've got any feedback or you've found a different way of doing it, please feel free to comment in the section below on the lesson page, and I'll see you in the next lesson.